Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. I feel like I'm gonna regret making this video, but you know what, why not wade into some toxic swamps on Dagobah? Why not, just for this very special video. No script today, only bullet points, because I know that at a certain point in time I'm just gonna get animated about this, because you know what? I saw this reveal, and lots of you heard on the reveal stream. I was incredibly excited for it. I think it's unbelievably cool. And yeah, I feel like the entire parade has just come along to be rained on, which is unfortunate, but sitting with it and taking a little bit longer to actually look at some things, through all of the incredibly bad faith takes that have been thrown out there, there is some legitimate criticism. So I want to go ahead and bring up some of that. That being said, today's video is going to be talking about what's actually happening, because as it turns out, there is an enormous amount of bad faith discourse and straight up misunderstanding and misinformation being spread online. Twitter in particular is really bad for this, big surprise. But yeah, I want to go ahead and set the record straight on what is happening, particularly on the narrative side of things, because oh my gosh, some of you guys, I love you, but you have been coming to me acting as though now I need to know all of the lore of Star Wars as well as all of the lore of Destiny. And let's be really clear, that's not the case. I'll explain more in a moment. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what's good about this, and I'm also going to talk about what's bad. So, starting off, what's actually happening? Renegades is a Star Wars-inspired expansion that is coming to Destiny's Fate saga. It has been noted by the devs that it is a definitively Destiny story. It is canon to Destiny and Destiny alone, but it takes cues heavily from the aesthetic, vibe, and other elements of inspiration that could be attributed to Star Wars. It is described as an homage. In other words, something that is reverential and referential to that source material. If this is an homage to Star Wars, you can expect a lot of things that would feel at home in a Star Wars universe, but which are not part of Star Wars itself. That is the angle of the expansion. Destiny is not a part of Star Wars canon, and Star Wars is not a part of Destiny canon. The two are not overlapping with each other, and it is not all of a sudden this case that one is being subsumed into another. The mouse does not own Bungie. The mouse does not own this expansion. Lucasfilm Games is at the very bottom of the trailer, at the very end, within all of this, because obviously Bungie wants to license this thing, so they don't get sued, because the mouse got lawyers. But no, to be incredibly clear, this is a Destiny expansion with a Destiny story that is very heavily inspired by Star Wars. This is not going to be a crossover. The implication there is that elements of that universe's narrative will immediately cross over into Destiny's, and that elements of Destiny's narrative will immediately cross over into Star Wars. That is not happening. And before anyone brings it up, yes, I get it, we've had a quote-unquote Destiny Star Wars crossover event before, but everything on that front of things has been about aesthetics and skins. And this is actually what I want to bring up next, but to be really blunt about it, and to be really clear, when it comes to the narrative, this is not a crossover. This is an homage. There is a difference. When it really comes down to the actual brass tacks of everything, you're not going to sit there and have storylines where you go into Jabba's palace to rescue a hunter, in inverted commas, called Han Solo from another evil hunter called Boba Fett. You're not going to have that storyline. It's not going to happen. Disengage your brain from the idea that this is something like, say, the Monster Hunter Witcher crossover, where Geralt straight up just takes a portal and bamfs into Monster Hunter's world. That's not happening here. It is different. Now, there is a legitimate point to be made, and we mentioned it just moments ago, which is to do with the crossover and the way that it is leeching into Destiny aesthetically. Now, here's the thing. I don't doubt that a General Grievous or Darth Vader skin is going to sell really well. In fact, I'd say it's even a completely valid take to say that that stuff is going to appear in some people's home screens and they're going to be like, dude, that's awesome. So yeah, sure, this is going to sell really well. However, the one legitimate point that I think is lost in a lot of this discourse is that this represents another step by which Destiny is losing some of its visual aesthetic. Destiny has a unique identity that, granted, is very broad, but also is definitively its own thing. I would much prefer if something with these skins had been done in the vein of the Assassin's Creed crossovers, or say the PlayStation crossovers, where you definitely had certain skins that were added that you could clearly differentiate as different characters or different identities, but they also fit into Destiny as just pieces of armor on their own. You can mix in a piece of the Ezio armor on Warlock, and it doesn't even look like the Ezio armor. It could fit and look like just another piece of Warlock armor. That's an example of this stuff being done correctly. The Star Wars stuff is not done correctly, and I think this applies to both this stuff and the old Star Wars armor that launched with Heresy. Neither of these have been done well because they are one-to-one recreations of things from Star Wars. Kylo Ren, Darth Vader, General Grievous, a Stormtrooper, an Imperial Royal Guard, a Death Trooper. All of these things are one-to-ones. I think you could also certainly make an argument about that for the DL-44 blaster and lightsaber in the trailer, even though, I have to admit, my Guardian wielding a lightsaber is something I have wanted since the very beginning. My first video in Destiny 1, after the game released, was literally me on my Warlock playing the Sword of Crota mission and wielding the sword. And you know what the title says? I'm an effing Jedi. Like, I have wanted to do this stuff for literally years. It has been the fantasy of my Guardian to sit there and basically cosplay a Jedi in all but name. And yeah, we've got to that point in time where now that's actually happening. But it doesn't necessarily fit the unique aesthetic of Destiny. So as excited as I am about all of that, that is a point I'm absolutely going to concede. What I do want to go ahead and also point out, though, is that this is not a new problem to Destiny. This has been going on for years, and to pin it all on Renegades is more like an effect of the straw that's starting to break the camel's back. Because let me tell you guys, this has been going on for so long and no one's really cared or noticed. When we did Guardian Games, literally just a few months ago, I didn't hear anyone complaining about the Glizzy Ghost. The ghost that's shaped like a hot dog. What? And also, years back, let's talk about other items that look completely out of place. Would you like your Sparrow to be a boat? And if we're going to take something and admit that it is completely out of place for the entirely serious sci-fi universe of Destiny, please let us also exclude the Micro Mini Sparrow. Yeah, all of this stuff does not fit Destiny's universe aesthetically. Now let's also be really clear. If you removed all of this stuff, people would also be mad, because there are also subsets of the community that love these things in particular. So ultimately you have a catch-22. Eververse perhaps should not have ever sold these items and we wouldn't even have had these conversations in the first place. But the effect is still there. So respectfully, if we're going to be mad at Renegades for having stuff like this, which I don't think is necessarily the wrong take, let's be equally mad at the idea that the Eververse store is slowly diluting Destiny's sense of aesthetic. And it's a shame because that's not a rule of thumb that's always followed. It's fantastic because you see how wide and how varied Destiny's aesthetic landscape is without contorting itself into something that is distinctly another universe. It's kind of sad because at the end of the day, I do think it is important for us to sit there and call this point out for what it is. But it's unfortunate because I think it is basically the landing point and the breach point for a bunch of bad faith discourse that has nothing to do with this point, but is also everything to do with all of the misinformation that has just been spread and what I've just talked to you guys about. It is stuff like this that is being used as a direct reference to say things like, General Grievous is now in the game. No, you have a General Grievous skin. I know semantics to some, but this is the point. Narratively, no, he's not. Aesthetically, yeah, he is. One of those things is incorrect, the other is correct. If they were both in the game, they would bother me, but only one of them is. So I'm only bothered about that one thing. Let's sit there and hope that we can tone down some of the Eververse stuff in the future. That's the problem. You guys sitting there talking about how now I need to learn about all of the different various Sith Lords. No, like, that's cool lore and much respect to the Star Wars canon for it because that stuff's awesome. I love that. But no, the two are not crossing. Let's dispose of those points. If we're going to talk about how there is an erosion of Destiny's universe, let's talk about it being eroded aesthetically, which is the place where it is actually having some of this stuff spill over. That is a legitimate point. The rest of it, total nonsense. And with that being said, it raises a much bigger question, which is simply, does this kind of erosion of Destiny into something that is not really its own identity apply to the rest of Renegades because it's a Star Wars-inspired expansion? And I think the answer is no. It's unproven, though. What I will simply say about this is the defining difference is whether or not Bungie takes care to make that distinction within the expansion's content. And from everything they said on the sofa back at the reveal event, I think the answer is that yes, they have definitively done that. Not that everyone on Twitter remembered because everyone seems to have forgotten or just read a tweet from some big account. I don't know. Point being, we need to sit there and wait and see what's going on there. But here's another little tidbit. To say that Destiny's universe has had no Star Wars inspiration at all would be a complete lie. Destiny has always had a Star Wars undertone and a Star Wars influence. Don't believe me? Well, let's start with the simplest point. Both of them are mythic science fiction universes, where you have themes such as the ability to travel through space and energy weapons, which are also crossed with questions to do with the greater purpose of beings in the universe and whether there is a higher power. And then you need to take a look at some of the earliest dev quotes. And I'm not talking about Destiny 2 at this point, I'm talking about D1. Before we even knew what D1 was, Bungie developers were starting to cite Star Wars as an inspiration for the world that they were building. And if you really want the most blatant, obvious example of the fact that Star Wars has always had some inspiration on Destiny stuff, please go all the way back to 2015 with The Taken King and look at Stormcaller. Stormcaller. You know, also referred to as Palpatine hands. This has been in the game for a decade, by the way. I don't want to hear a single thing about the idea that Star Wars is some new inspiration to Destiny and that it's never had any footprint on this game. Now, don't get me wrong there, that's only for the people who are doing that in an absolutist sense, saying that the entire game has never had anything like this and has somehow been some kind of pure and nostalgic and completely unique art style, despite the fact that everything is inspired by other stuff. No, if you're sitting there and you're worried about the continual erosion, again, different point. If you're sitting there saying that Star Wars has never had an influence on Destiny and never should, you just don't know Destiny. I'm terribly sorry, but no, that's just not how it's ever been. So we've talked about what's actually happening, and we've talked about what I think the probable bad possibilities of this are, and what is already out there that I think is actually genuinely bad. The armor and the aesthetic erosion of Destiny is a problem, and I hope that there is a more meaningful push to address this, and that it doesn't get too carried away within the expansion. That being said, what's the potential good coming out of Renegades? Because you know what? This is happening whether we want it to or not, and as a result, we need to think about what's actually going to sit there and present itself to us in a potential Star Wars-inspired Destiny expansion. So what good content could come out of that? Well, let's start off with something that is not Star Wars at all, which is the fact that we get more content about the Dredgens. For those of you who don't know what this is, it's one of Destiny's oldest but coolest stories. You heard of Last Word and Thorn? Destiny's two very famous exotic hand cannons? Yeah, well, one of those was wielded by a Dredgen, and the other ended up being wielded by a Dredgen, spoiler alert. So if you want to go ahead and have some awesome Dredgen content, yeah, we're going to get served some of that right now. That is a really cool set of storylines that was nurtured in the background for almost half a decade by John Goff within the game, and it led us to some of the coolest lore that we got that culminated in the Year of Forsaken, with the Season of the Drifter and the Season of Opulence. So yeah, awesome content coming down the line on that front alone. I'm always happy to see more expansions to the Dredgen storyline. I think it is possibly some of the coolest stuff, not just because of what it represents, but also because it is one of Destiny's authentically oldest story elements, and brings it back to another thing that is very similar to Star Wars' vibe, the vibe of being a space western. So yeah, the content makes a ton of sense if that's the angle they're going for. The story also, I think, genuinely expands the world of Destiny, and again, this is not a uniquely Star Wars point, this is a Destiny point. The small blurb that we got, which mentions everything going on in the expansion, which also mentioned the Dredgens, talks about how we'll be exploring a criminal underworld and facing off against an evil empire. We have no idea what the evil empire is going to be. Maybe something to do with the Cabal, given that it's a Cabal ship that's shown off in the trailer. But the criminal underworld is absolutely something that Destiny can explore more of. Guardians can fit into that in really interesting ways. The entire set of principles they'll be expanding on and the characters they might introduce with all of that could be really interesting. And as a repeat, no, you're not going to be interrupting something that's going on with Boba Fett. So yeah, cool potential stuff that could be going on in here, all of it Star Wars inspired, but all of it making a lot of sense for Destiny. Fleshing out the world like this and adding more villains, more ways that we can understand the world, maybe even new destinations out in the Oort Cloud, all of that stuff sounds really cool. And lastly, if we're going to get back to the purity of things, which I think is so commonly lost in today's discourse, I think it just sounds like fun. Do you guys remember fun? Have we forgotten fun? I feel like we have forgotten how to have fun. Not just in this community, which absolutely after 10 years of being in it, I can understand and see and feel why we're all so jaded, but like, just generally, across the entire discourse of the internet. Everyone is so happy to clinically deconstruct things under a microscope. And you know what? I understand that really well because I contribute to it sometimes. Don't believe me? My video critiquing Lightfall's story within the first 24 hours and basically calling out that no, it did not hit the bar that we expected after Witch Queen was number 12 on YouTube trending. globally, not just in gaming. That thing went on to get over 500,000 views, and I think was probably one of the clarion calls for me sitting there and saying, no, the story is not up to snuff, guys. It's not right. So yeah, I've had my fair share of looking under the microscope at things and critiquing things. And you know what? We do that too much. It's not to say that we shouldn't critique things at all, because for the love of God, we all know that without critique, things don't get better. But critique, unfortunately, is not nuanced enough nowadays to not immediately spill over into something which feels adversarial. In fact, even in the process of making this video, my frustration is coming out, and I imagine there's going to be someone in the responses who says, man, he comes across sounding like such a dick. And you know what? That's a part of our entire jaded way of being. We can't possibly express something nuanced in critique of something without it also coming across as frustrated. It's something that I struggle with. It's something I think we all struggle with. And you know what's even worse? When this gets dumped into a tweet, text has no tone. So there's no way of telling. Common misconceptions of things might interpret someone sitting there and offering some valid and very level-headed critique as them being furious about something. And it's really simple to do that. It happens all the time. But we've forgotten that games are meant to be for fun. And that if we're constantly deconstructing and critiquing things before we've even experienced them, then we're not really giving them a chance to entertain us. And that we've forgotten what the purpose of the game is in the first place. So to be really clear, if you're not sold on this, that's fine. Go ahead and wait for reviews. Go ahead and just sit this one out and chill. And if it turns out that it is actually brilliant, jump on in afterwards. Don't pre-order. That's a very easy way of sitting there and waiting and reserving until you understand what's actually happening with it. And all you lose out on is the stuff that I've already talked about, which I actually think is really egregious. No Land Beyond or New Land Beyond will come with the expansion later. Don't worry about that. Worry about the fact that if you want to make sure you're actually enjoying the content, you have the options to go ahead and do that. This is not me saying don't critique things. Again, I've talked plenty about how I think the armor is pretty egregious. But what I am saying is let's sit there and also remember that games are meant to be about having fun. The thing we seem to have sorely forgotten. I don't want to go ahead and publish this video, but I will. And you know what? Frustrating as it may be, hopefully I get through to people and we remember that whilst critique is important, the idea of games being played for fun is also important. I imagine there's going to be 10,000 people in the comments calling me a shill. I don't care. Just, this is what I think of it. I think a lot of the conversation's overblown and I'm tired. If you have your own thoughts, leave them down below in the comments, and if you want more Destiny content, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on email notifications. And as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me. And in the meantime, my name is Bife. Perodacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.